Okay, so I thought I'd go ahead and show a new deck list for the recent changes to Branded on the latest ban list. If you didn't know, obviously we have 3 Aluber now, and we also have 3 Opening, and we have 3 Saronir. So the first thing to point out is that you're gonna play all of these changes, right? You're playing 3 Opening, you're playing 3 Aluber, which is fairly obvious. I think it's fairly obvious. The one that might be a little bit less obvious to some people is Saronir. I think that this is still a 3 of. I think you should always play the maximum amount of Saronir possible. That's always how Branded has played it. When this card was first released, it was a 3 of, up until it got limited. Then it was a 1 of in every deck. I think that's the same now. This card is just good to play. So the reason why it's good to play at 3 is because it's a good draw. It's the best pair for high spirits in a lot of situations. Albaz can sometimes be better, but Saronir is always the best, or the second best at least. It's also always a good discard if you don't need it, if you're just discarding for Lubellion or Opening. It's just one of the best cards to discard because it can be Retribution, or it can be Sword, it can even be Lubellion, I guess. But that's really good. Just the option of sending Retribution, even if you're not playing Sword, is good, right? Retribution's a good discard, so Saronir is logically an even better discard because it has the option of sending Retribution or something else, right? It can send anything, really. Branded Lost, Branded Fusion, if you already have Retribution access. So it's just a really good discard. Another reason why it's good to draw Saronir is because it's a hand trap. It's actually a Bestial, which is, it's not the best hand trap in most matchups, but it's not terrible in some of them. It can be pretty good against Ubel or Mathmech. In the mirror match, it's very good. Tia, it's very good. And if we get Fiendsmith in the next pack, then this is also actually a good hand trap against the Fiendsmith engine. So this is something you're going to want to draw, or be happy to draw quite often, going second. So yeah, that's why I think it's important to play all 3 Saronir. It also makes your combos stronger, right? If you draw Aluber, for example, on its own, that combo is okay. You search for Branded Fusion. But if you draw Aluber plus Saronir, it's actually even stronger because you can search for High Spirits, and that lets you do an even stronger combo. So something you might be thinking is that if Saronir is such a good draw, then why were we never playing 3 Lubellion in every list in the first place, right before, when it was at 1? Why did we not play 3 Lubellion? Because this card can search for Saronir, so it's pretty much just as good as Saronir, if not better. Surely, right? This is true in almost every way, except for one, except for a couple. It's a worse draw than Saronir going second, because you don't have the option of using it as a hand trap, whereas you do with Saronir. You can actually use this as a hand trap. The second reason why Lubellion can be not as good of a draw as Saronir is that in multiples, if you draw 2 of it, 2 Saronir is better than 2 Lubellion. The second Lubellion in your hand is always redundant, whereas a second Saronir can actually find a good use, right? You could use one as a hand trap, and then the second one as an engine piece on your turn, or you can use the first one on your turn 1 combo to get this second effect, and then the second one as a hand trap on your opponent's turn if you're going first. So 2 Saronir is easier to work with than 2 Lubellion. This is kind of redundant, so it's kind of bricky to draw 3. And then another thing I'll say is that 3 Lubellion was never bad, right? If you played 3 Lubellion in your list, it was never bad. It's actually a really good draw. It's just that you never needed to draw Lubellion to play. You didn't need it as an essential draw. It was just really good. It comboed well with a lot of cards. But in order to save space, you kind of just cut it down because it was kind of bricky at 3. You never wanted to draw 2, and you didn't need to draw it, so it was okay playing just 2 copies. Which is why it generally was played at 2. I always generally played it at 2. But Saronir is different. I do think it's better to play all 3 Saronir. So yeah, against Fiendsmith, this card is going to be pretty good. You also have Magnamut, so that's 4 hand traps you have that all hit Fiendsmith with the Bestials alongside your other hand traps. And something I'll say just to make it clear is that even if Fiendsmith doesn't come out in the next pack, you're still playing all 3 Saronir. That doesn't change the equation, in my opinion. You still play all 3. So because you have more consistency now with the 3rd Aluber and the 3rd opening, and you kind of have half consistency with the extra Saronir being better pairs for High Spirits and Cartesia and like deployment and stuff, it's easy to cut the extra consistency cards that you used to play in Branded, so things like Keeper of Dragon Magic. Right, this card you no longer need to play, really, because you have those extra starters. This card was only ever played to keep up the number of starters high enough, but now you definitely have it. Right, this card was usually just a 1 of, or like sometimes a 2 of. You never maxed out on this because you didn't need that many extra starters, and this is one of the worst ones, so you don't need to play any anymore because you have the Aluber, which is a better draw. You'll also never need to play a second kit. This is something that I've seen people do. Even now, you don't need this. You never needed it before, but some people played it. You definitely don't need it now. And then another starter that was often played is Nadia. You don't need this one anymore, I don't think so. You didn't play this in every list anyway, but you definitely probably don't need to play it now because you have enough consistency. This card is still good. This card has a place going first specifically, so like in a side deck, this is still really, really useful. But if you're interested in just playing it in your main deck because you want consistency, I don't think it's mandatory anymore. So something specific that I want to bring up, because it's going to be more common now that we have extra opening and Aluber, is drawing Aluber and opening together, both in your opening hand. There is something important that you have to recognize about these cards, and that is that in a vacuum, without any other specific combo pieces, if your Aluber gets impugned, or like ashed or something, if it gets stopped somehow, opening does nothing to actually extend you from that point. This is not an extender, right? Because unless you're discarding something specific, let's say you're discarding complete brick, so Ash or Maxx C or something, Fool Us, then summoning Quem does nothing, right? Because there's no card that you can send to the graveyard on its own which does anything. You can't make Verte because opening locks you out of the extra deck, and there's nothing you can send with the Quem that can do anything on its own. So you can't summon another Aluber, of course, because it's once per turn, and Tragedy does nothing either. So one thing that I would recommend is if you do draw just opening and Aluber as your starters, and you have no other good discards to pair with a Quem, then you're going to want to use the opening first to summon a Quem to try and bait Imperm out of your opponent, or even Veiler. So like you could maybe do it in the draw phase, or out of the draw phase, I mean, in the main phase, so that you can bait Imperm and Veiler on your Quem before normal summoning Aluber. So it's just something to think about because it's going to be coming up more often now that you play 3 of each. Most of the time though, you will have probably something to do with the Quem. Let's say you have like a Retribution in your hand as the discard for opening. Well, now the Quem does extend because the Retribution plus the Branded Fusion, which you can send with the Quem, gets you to Branded Fusion. If you have a Saronir in your hand, it's the same thing. You can send Retribution and Branded Fusion. And if you have Shrouded, that's the same thing. So like pretty much any of the cards work, but like if you do happen to draw like a hand of opening plus Aluber and then like just Maxx C's and Fool Losses, things like that, just know that you should probably try using the opening first. And then something else which comes up more often now that you have 3 Saronir is what kind of combos you can do when you draw it. So if we look at this combo, for example, Aluber plus Saronir, you can see that it is a little different than just a 1-card Aluber combo. You actually do make use of the Saronir in the hand. So you can see that instead of searching for Branded Fusion, we get High Spirits so that we can pair it with the Saronir, and that gets us to Shrouded Dragon. So the difference here is that we get to Branded Fusion through the graveyard, which is expending Retribution, but in return we're getting a draw 1. We wouldn't have had this card if we just searched for the Branded Fusion directly. So we're getting a draw, and we're also getting Titanic Clad in the end phase. If you wanted to play around Ash, this could be Albion, so it's a lot better than just passing after Ash on Branded Fusion. So it's this, and this is a common theme. If you're not going to go through your Retribution for some other reason, then whenever you have a Saronir in your hand, searching for High Spirits with Aluber is pretty common instead of Branded Fusion. And then the last thing to mention about this list, just in case it wasn't obvious, is that obviously Maxx C is at 2 now, so you have an extra slot in your deck, which can be used for other stuff. You're only going to play 2 Maxx C. I haven't replaced it with another non-engine card. It's just been replaced by the extra Saronirs. But like I said, the Saronir is kind of a hand trap against specifically Fiendsmith next format. So this list should be pretty good. I'm not saying that this is the perfect list. I might change my mind once I start actually testing in Fiendsmith format, or whatever the format ends up being. But this should be pretty good. It's definitely the optimal way to apply the new changes, no matter what the deck list actually looks like. It will have 3 Aluber, it will have 3 opening, and it will have 3 Saronir. That is for sure. One other thing which you could play in Fiendsmith format, this is a possibility, is this card. This is a very, very special tech for Fiendsmith specifically. This card is a hand trap. It says that if a monster is special summoned from the main deck, you get to summon this from your hand, and then when you do that, you basically get to summon Ecclesia from your deck, which this card lets you quick effect in your opponent's main phase, summon Albaz from your deck. So it's basically a turn 0 Mirror Jade, which is a really, really strong hand trap, of course. You get to fuse away your opponent's extra deck monster and then also banish something, generate advantage in the end phase. Really, really good. It's like basically like your opponent resolves Maximus and you get to send things like Albion and Titanic Clad. It's really, really free win when it happens. But it is only really good against Fiendsmith because no other deck triggers the Gizmek the same way. It does kind of work sometimes in the mirror match when your opponent uses deployment, but that's not consistent enough. Fiendsmith, however, will consistently trigger this every time they combo. So this is something to keep in mind. If Fiendsmith ends up being really, really popular, this could be in the main deck. But honestly, I doubt it, because there's a lot of decks in Master Duel, and I don't think it's worth playing. I don't think it's worth playing a brick in every other matchup, just for the Fiendsmith matchup. Anyway, that is it. I just wanted to show what I think a new deck list would look like and explain how some of the recent changes are going to work. So that is it. I'm not 100% sure that this list will be what I end up playing once the format actually starts. So after testing, maybe I'll change it, but for now I think it will look something like this. This is definitely where I'm going to start testing from. The most important thing is, like I said, you will play all of the new cards.